Hi everyone, Darren Hunter here. In today's age, you can't just have boring photos on your property marketing listings. You've got to have a virtual walkthrough tour. That way tenants can quickly qualify themselves and look through the property even at 2 in the morning online. But I can hear you say, look, Darren, it's too expensive with cameras and takes too long. That's why you've got to go to virtualtourscreator.com.au and check out how you can do walkthrough virtual tours using your mobile phone. Go and check it out. Also, talk to Tom there at virtualtourscreator.com.au on how you can quickly turn your tours into really cheap floor plans as well. Take care. Hi everyone, Darren Hunter here, and we're with a PM Power podcast show with Jackie Skein today, and we are really going to get in deep on how to stay away from the tribunal. Now, before we get Jackie involved, and a big hello, Jackie, thank you so much for coming on board, and let's just go a little bit of a deep dive into your background. Now, you've been in property management about 10 years. Now, you are running your own rent roll from home. Well done. That is certainly the model where I feel a lot of the property management is going. Now, you're working in, your business is called My Logan Realty. Now, that already tells me a lot about the type of business that you're doing. Now, people don't know out there in Brisbane, Logan is a low socio-economic area. Now, Jackie, you've told me that you've only ever really in the last 10 years worked property management in low socio-economic areas. Is that right?
Yeah. Logan and Ipswich mainly. That's where I've been pretty much the whole time.
Okay, so now you told me when you first started 10 years ago, you were in Tribunal, which in Brisbane is called QCAT, and of course in New South Wales you've got NCAT, and then there's VCAT in Victoria, and there's SACAT in South Australia. Our Western Australian colleagues have court. And New Zealand has their own tribunal as well. So we've all got our own version of what we call tribunal, but you were in with the same type of demographic of housing. You were in tribunal regularly 10 years ago, but Jackie, you've told me something amazing, which is really what this podcast is all about. You haven't been to tribunal once with the same demographic of tenant for the last 6 years. Now, that is amazing. I take my hat off to you. I've never heard of that before, of a property manager working low socio and not actually going to tribunal in 6 years. So just a massive congratulations from me.
Yeah, it's well, something interesting. So my first 3 to 4 years of my career, I went 40 times. So pretty much as, the senior in the portfolio or the property manager with an assistant, that would be your responsibility. And yeah, just every month, sometimes 5-6 times a month, and then you'd have nothing for a while. And very experienced as in going there. But then I feel like, what I've learned becoming more experienced in communicating and property management, you don't actually have to go. That is the absolute worst case situation that we can be in, because it's really out of your control. It's up to the adjudicator on how they're feeling. And, we've all heard of cases when we're like, oh, this poor owner, the tenant's 80 days in arrears and the adjudicator said they can stay again. It's it's out of your control, which I don't like.
So Jackie, I think we obviously with this here, and we're going to set up now the structure for this podcast and really do a deep dive. Let's talk about tribunal now. For a little bit about my background, everyone. There was a 2 to 3 year period in my previous life, right in the 90s, where I did full-time property inspector position. That's all ingoing inspections, all outgoing inspections, all routines, and full-time tribunal hearings for a rent roll of 500 properties. No different from what Jackie in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, which are pretty hardcore low socio. And so I was in the tribunal all the time, but doing files on behalf of the property managers. I would be my job was doing all the road work. All right. I was the guy that jumped in the car. The property managers are in the office all the time. So there was a lot of stuff, particularly around two main areas, which are rent arrears and bond related matters. They were the main two. There may be other breaches, or, you know, like a person's just smashed up the property and we have to get an emergency eviction or something like that. Very rare situation. But Jackie, before we get into all that and do a deep dive, let's talk about the trouble and the problems of going to tribunal, because we need to paint the bleak picture. Everybody, you want to do all you can to not go to tribunal. And Jackie, I think you're a great role model there of we've got to do everything that we can to avoid the place. Now, let's talk about the problem, because it is the last end reactory result, isn't it? It is the end of the road. It's the end of the line. And for me, I remember tribunal for me was get the file out, prep the file, all the reading done on it, and jump in a car, drive 45 minutes, park, walk 10 minutes, book in at a registrar office, sit down for another 15, 20 minutes because they're late. Now, I know other places like West Australia, that might be now a 3-hour sit down in a big line. And then go in before, you know, you don't know. It's a lucky dip who you hear is going to be, whether they're a good or a bad one, whether they like you or they hate you, you know, whether you've got a good reputation with them or a bad reputation. Sit down, tenant shows up, or they don't show up. And then 20 minutes later, they ring up, hey, I'm still on my way. And it just problem after problem after problem after problem. Now, they were the ones I was doing when I was inspector, but what about the ones that were mine? When I got the advice in the post that a tribunal hearing has been set 3 weeks ahead, I'm already feeling stress and anxiety about it. You know,
sure, yeah.
I always had anxiety, and I would have sleepless nights on these things because I hated conflict. So, what's your take on tribunal? When you think about going to tribunal, what are you thinking of the pain that you want to avoid?
Yeah, exactly. Like all of those things times 100, because especially when you're just doing portfolio-based management, you have to, so obviously there's been this whole dispute. You got to print off everything. You got to make 3 copies. You know, in Queensland specifically, there was a period where you would lodge for a urgent eviction because of rent arrears or whatever reason, and you don't even have a date for 6 weeks, and then the date's 2 months in advance, and then you go there and you sit there all day. And then, you know, there was one time when I had an assistant prep the documents for me. The notice to leave was issued on the day that the breach expired, not the following day. Got thrown out at 67 days. It's completely out of your control. It's a waste of time. It's just everything. It's totally can be avoided in maybe 99% of the cases. So there's just nothing positive, and it's just completely out of your control.
It is. And if we can do whatever we can to go, I am not going to allow this situation to end up in tribunal, then we want to do everything that we can. So let's just now talk about rent arrears and late rent. And because that, for me, was the bulk of the reason why I'd ever go to tribunal, was because, you know, we've hit what we call a Form 2 in South Australia. We call them Form 2s or termination notices. You know, that's been served. The tenant hasn't paid. Now I've got to go the next step after that form has actually expired. And, you know, I remember putting up a meme some months ago, probably a couple of months ago, around about Christmas time. And I'm always doing social media that gets attention. And it was February evictions, and this is Christmas time. February evictions occur because the property manager was not persistent enough at Christmas time. And if you go back to the Inspired Growth Training Facebook page and go back to that Christmas period, I think it was maybe before Christmas or just after Christmas, I put that there. I got hammered.
Yeah, and I saw it.
So unfair. You're trying to say that, you know, we're at fault if the tenant doesn't pay their rent. And I was just slammed. And I put a little bit of my 2 cents in there, but I just stood back and I thought, yeah, just let them fly. A lot of anger, a lot of upset. And my point is that early intervention is our best friend. And I remember doing, Jackie, a 3-hour training on serial late rent offenders and what I call zero tolerance rent control. I had a 3-hour session just on that. And I did it at the Real Estate Institute of Adelaide one day in South Australia. And I had a room of about 30 people, and two particular ladies came to me after that session and thanked me. And my training's pretty in your face. It's pretty much, it is very much zero tolerance. And I had two ladies come up and said, Darren, we work for the government. Just want to say thank you, because they're part of the bond guarantee side of things. They give the guarantees for the people that can't afford to pay their bond. And they've got a rule that if the tenant has a bond guarantee with that particular property manager, the property manager has to let them know 2 days if the tenant's in arrears. And once they know the tenant is in arrears, they're immediately knocking on their door. Because what they realize is the war is won or it's lost within that first 7 days of a tenant getting behind. And if we're not quickly onto the tenant real quick, and we allow it to get more than 7 days, then we're very much at risk of it going past what I call the point of no return, which is where tenants realize, shit, I'm so far behind now, I can't keep up. And they're heading for the cliff, which is eviction now, and it's too far gone. So my point is, we're back to that meme again about February evictions. If we're really into using the analogy of stamping out cigarette butts at the point that they're on the ground and smoldering, and putting the minimal effort to stamp out then, instead of waiting for that cigarette butt to then ignite some trash or something nearby, which ignites into a bushfire. And a lot of property managers are fighting the battle at flame stage when it should be at smoldering cigarette butt stage.
Yeah, for sure.
So over to you, Jackie, because I've dominated so far, but you talk about communication.
Yeah. I'm massive on relationships and communication. The relationships I have with my tenants, like I will never, I'm going to put it on the record, you will never see a 1-star review from my agency from a tenant, because we will negotiate and speak to them and resolve it. So with the, taking over some managements recently, quite a few of them have been 16, 18 days in arrears when I've inherited the management. And the first thing I say to the tenant is like, I understand shit happens. Sometimes you lose hours at work, and I make them feel really heard. I make them know that, because the point of rent arrears, and, it does happen in Logan and it happens everywhere, but in low socioeconomic areas where there's probably not as much education financially for them to manage their money, then, if they feel like they can trust you and they can come to you, we resolve everything, because they come to us and say, look, this has happened. I'm like, it's fine. I understand. I'll let the owner know. And we are able to work it out with them so that it doesn't become a problem. I think the escalation where it goes breach, notice to leave, QCAT, one, there's probably not a lot of relationship there where the property manager doesn't have time for them. So the tenants don't know, they become overwhelmed quite quickly with it, put their head in the sand and ignore you, and you can't get a hold of them. You chasing them, you're knocking on the door, whatever. They ignore you because they're ashamed and embarrassed, and they don't want to have, because there's a perception in the industry as well that, this property manager is just going to take me to court and evict me, where if there's a bit of empathy, and I also work with a lot of organizations like Rent Connect, and we help get them rental grants to fix it back up. And a lot obviously is dependent on the character of the tenant. If the character is, they're trying to do their best and they've just lost their job or whatever it is, then we also have like food banks where they might be able to go and get a basket of food for $20, and an extra $90 can go towards the arrears. So I very much work with them, and that's a part of the early intervention part of it, because it's about them feeling heard and feeling respected, where they're going to communicate when they're paying, and they text me and, Jackie, I just paid $50 towards the arrears. So very rarely does it even get to the notice to leave stage, because we're working out with them. And the other part of the communication is just explaining that to the owner and just saying, look, she has just lost the job. She's a single mum with 2 kids. She's trying her best. She's gone to Centrelink. She's getting an advance in her rent. We've put her in contact with Rent Connect. We've taken her, she's gone to the food bank, whatever they need. And then they feel supported and it doesn't get escalated. So there's a whole, I got heaps to say on relationships and communication, because it's, when you show empathy to a person and they feel heard and they feel like you empathize with them about their situation, because I don't think anyone wants to be in the position where they have no money in their account and can't pay the rent, then everything flips, everything changes, because it's not about, early intervention as well. We got the most beautiful technology ever existed. Console Cloud, like that's what I use. They get a text message from day 1, day 2, day 3, emails, it's all automated. So really all I should be doing is picking up the phone and making them feel heard on top of that communication.
Okay, so you're probably putting in a layer that I personally, never, talking about empathy and things like that. Now, let's just go back to using the analogy of the bases, So base 1 is breach notice. Base 2 is application to tribunal. Base 3 is tribunal. Base 4 is eviction. And you and I are talking, we don't even let people get to base 1, okay? Because if you're at base 3, you're probably going to go to base 4. And base 4 is such, can I just say, everybody, eviction is such a bad thing. It is the worst outcome you could ever have, because I remember generally when we're doing rent arrears training with property managers, we like to get a workshop out and get on the board right from the initial issuing of the breach notice, all the communication with the tenant, going to tribunal, the drive time, prep time, stress time, calling the owner. The closer we get to base 4, the more time we've got with the owner on the phone. They're getting more stressed. We're going back and forth to the property to make sure the actual tenant's still there, even if they're not communicating. And there's just so much time. We actually measured anywhere up to 32 hours. That's meet the bailiff out at the property, or whether they call it a sheriff or the bailiff, depends on what state you're from. Then you've got to, in all the cleanup, the final inspection, meeting tradespeople out there like the cleaner, to show them everything you want done, not just giving them a list. It just goes on. It's anywhere up to 32 hours. Now, we've only got 40 hours technically for a property manager. We know a lot of them work more than that, but that is nearly a working week for one eviction. No wonder why we get stressed. So we want to do everything we can, people, to keep right away from base 4. Don't even allow the tenant even to get to base 1. And another comment I like to make is that being pro zero tolerance, having a zero tolerance on late rent, means the tenant's children, everybody remains in a rental property. We're not allowing the tenant to get behind. But if we're pro-tolerant, allowing the tenant to get behind because we're too nice about it, or we just don't control the situation and allow it to get to base 4, we are now pro-eviction. And the owner's the loser, the tenant's the loser, the innocent children are the loser. That really gets me. And we as property managers are the loser too, because an eviction is like a packet of cigarettes. It takes years off your life. And I do appreciate your mode around communication, and how you said you'll never see a 1-star review from me, and that's a big thing to say.
I stand by it, because I think that, the relationships I form with my tenants very early on, they're equally as strong as my relationships with my owner. Like, another big call, I'll probably never lose a management to service that was in my control. If they had unrealistic expectations, that could be different, but the relationship is very strong with the tenants immediately, and that's why I'm extra. I go even one step way further with the tenant selection. I very much rent on character and their personalities, as well as the fundamental checklist ticks. But I only rent to people that I want to rent to for the next 10 years, and with that attitude, the tenants feel more secure, because they're like, if I just pay my rent and look after the place, I'm going to have a tenancy for a long time. And then it makes my job easier. So, it's like, could do a whole other podcast episode on this for sure.
Well,
but
let's just do a little bit of a deep dive on that, because I think that tenant selection is everything. If we don't get that bit right, everything else goes to crap. And we're probably getting to base 4 pretty quickly, right? If we don't do the tenant selection correct. So, let's get into tenant selection. You talked about character and personality, And do I want to rent a property and have a long-term relationship, working relationship with this tenant for up to 10 years? That's quite a criteria that you're putting on yourself there. So let's talk about what are the sort of typical things that you're looking for that the average property manager down the road isn't?
I'm looking for someone who's extremely respectful of my time, someone who's put a lot of effort into communicating with me their situation. And, you know, I love a good cover letter where they tell me their dog's names and they're very transparent from the beginning. You know, someone who takes the time to have a conversation. Like, if you give me a call, if I list a rental property and you give me a call and we have a really nice chat and bond, the chances of you getting the rental over anyone else is automatically higher because we've already built that initial rapport. So I'm very conversationally based character profiling, and I've done a lot of personal development in terms of body language and the language people use and the tone and the everything that goes with it. So that's really helped with profiling tenants.
Okay. Another thing I want to throw into the ring here, whenever I've done an eviction, you know, and certainly my last 3 years of being a frontline property manager, I had 3 evictions, I think, in 3 years, or 3 landlord insurance claims or something like that. And the very, very first tenant that I actually selected, would you believe, the very first one in that last 3-year period, which is the last company I was with before I became state property manager, before I then became a full-time trainer and consultant. My very, very, very first tenant I selected right back when I first started with that company in July in the year 2000. I remember it because the first day I started is the first day of GST. And that I had already been out and signed up a new landlord that couldn't wait for me to start. So I saw him a few days before, signed him up, and his tenant turned out to be a gambler. She had a reasonable reference. Now, it wasn't the best type of property. It was a fruit property because this is a regional town out in amongst a fruit, you know, wine grape winery of grapevines. And so it's hard. It's like an old picker's quarters. And she turned out, she was working, had a good job at Australia Post. She had a rental reference. Unbeknownst to me, she had a gambling problem. She was pilfering money at the post office out of envelopes, out of people's mail. She was stealing out of people's mail. She lost her job. She then ended up gambling her money. And there was nothing that was going to stop an eviction from happening. There was nothing that could stop it. Even to the point where I rolled up at the property that right at eviction, I'd even been at the property with a bailiff. He knocked on the door. She opened it like, "Oh, what are you doing here? Oh, am I behind in my rent? Oh my goodness me. I didn't even realize." And not one thing had even been packed. Like, she completely had a head in the sand over the whole situation. From that point, I have to give her 48 hours to get her gear out. 24 hours later, she was still sitting in a beanbag, watching TV, eating popcorn. And I had to call all sorts of people to come in and help her get her gear out because she clearly couldn't help herself. Now, she was an example of an eviction that I call the vices. And the vices are people's addictions that cost money to feed. Gambling. In Australia, we've got the problem of cigarettes because cigarettes are so expensive. We've got drugs. We've got expensive living. And gambling is another one. And so I've always ever experienced an eviction is because of those vices. I've never actually ever evicted someone because they innocently lost their job, had a medical issue. Those people have always worked it out, worked with me, come right. They're true to their word, and we deal with it early. What's your experience in that regard, Jackie, with the vices?
You know, it happens, and especially in a low socioeconomic area like Logan, like drinking, drug use is very prevalent, alcohol, smoking, gambling, all all of it. And then you got the whole other layer of like domestic violence, mental health. There's all types of different things. The mental health one is probably one of the biggest in terms of when it becomes really out of your control as a PM. So that requires very expert handling of the situation. But, you know, it's I think the point of the vices is the reason that it escalates and becomes such a problem is because people don't know how to manage their money, and the system's not set up for people to know how to manage their money. So it's all well and good to have a drink, have a smoke, gamble, do whatever you're doing. But the point is they can't manage their money to also do those things and pay their rent. So that's probably the bigger conversation, and like it's out of our control. We don't have any say on what the tenants spend their money on, and how they, you know, live to a certain extent. That's out of our control. But what is in our control with that is having the relationship with the tenant, so they trust you enough to call you and say, Jackie, I actually fucked up and gambled all our money at the casino this weekend. What can we do to make this situation better? Like, that's something really special, and you can't get it with everyone, but that's pretty much the ideal outcome that is in your control as the property manager, because then you can, like, maybe they fall behind 7 days and then they pay $70 or whatever. If you have a plan in place and you advise the owner and they know it's going to affect their tenancy history, but you just got to work in with them to get the desired outcome is that, or maybe you allow them to break lease without penalty, depending on the market. If the market's hot and you know you'll re-rent it in a week, maybe you negotiate to do something like that. Or everything's pretty negotiable, in my opinion.
Okay, no, that's cool. Certainly my experience is by the time a person gets to 14 days and the vices are involved, a postal payment plan just means nothing. You know, very rarely do they follow them because they're already behind, and there's a habit that's in place stopping the payment from occurring on time as well, particularly, you know, in low socio. Let's keep on moving on. Let's talk about bond claim issues now, because the biggest reason why we may end up in tribunal is to do with rent.
Yeah.
The other main reason that we may end up in tribunal, and these can get a bit messy, is people generally disputing bonds, or there's some sort of dispute at the final inspection. They're unhappy about this. And so it's a bond-related matter that ends up at tribunal. What are some of the things, Jackie, you've put in place to stop you going to tribunal on issues like that?
Yeah, like I said, everything is negotiable. You know, sometimes shit happens and people, sorry if I'm swearing, I'm sure if it's not allowed, you can beep it out at some point.
I'm sure a lot of other property managers have a swear jar in their office that's pretty much
this is
full
just
of
how I
money.
talk. I'm just very real. So in terms of bond disputes, like, everything is negotiable, and there's two people we can negotiate with. We can negotiate with the owner and we can negotiate with the tenant. And, you know, being in the industry for a long time, we see sometimes we've taken over the management. We didn't do the entry condition report. They moved in, the property was filthy. They've moved out, they've done some cleaning themselves. You can negotiate on every single element in what we're talking about without escalating it. Your job is the mediator. You're the messenger and you're the mediator. So sometimes that's give a little, take a little, you know, work in the other third person that is your just saving grace in property management half the time is your tradies. Maybe they do it as a little cheapy for the tenant because of, you know, that you give them so much work and maybe they're prepared to do you a favor. Or maybe I've done this myself. Maybe I'm going and cleaning the things the tenant missed, so I don't even have to have that, like, not saying that's a boundary you don't really want to dabble into too much, but sometimes between the three of those people and yourself, 99% of the time, if you're reasonable and, like, maybe with fair wear and tear as well, you give a little, you take a little bit. Okay, we're going to get this wall paint and patched. However, on this wall, every single thing is negotiable. And I think if you're coming, and the tenants will love it because you're actually working with them and you're making it clear, you're showing them all the negatives of, like, everything we've just talked about we don't want to go to QCAT. It's going to be a waste of your time. You have to take the time off work. It's going to be stressful. You're going to have to lodge the documents. We've already done blah, 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 blah. Just absolutely, your job as the property manager is to influence the situation so that they think QCAT is really bad. It's just the worst case. Let's really avoid that. Let's work in with the property manager and the owner. This owner's being reasonable. They've already said A, B, and C. Let's go back and clean those 5 things and end it. That's always, and if you just communicate authentically and honestly to the tenant and know your legislation and explain, well, yes, but on the original entry, that hole wasn't noted on the wall. That's not considered to be fair wear and tear. One thing that also works for me is I use my experience to influence the situation. I'd say previously we had this and it cost this much to get done. And also in previous cases, like, because I went to QCAT so much when I was starting out, I've got a lot of cases where I can reference back mentally, and I'm sure a lot of people do in the industry. You can say, well, in a similar case than yours, we went to QCAT and the adjudicator found that that wasn't fair wear and tear, and then the tenants were charged this. I'm happy to work in with you and get multiple quotes, or if you know a painter, do you know a good painter? Like, everything is literally negotiable in it, and the point of it should be to negotiate within, and sometimes that involves having a hard conversation with the owner and saying, look, I know you think it's the Taj Mahal, but those curtains are 8 years old. There's no way that we're going to be able to claim anything for them. I can try and ask for maybe $100 compensation from the tenant, which I personally think is reasonable. How do you feel about just doing $100 compensation and we call it a day? That's
I think this is great points, Sarah. A couple of points I can add as well is just making sure that you have a tribunal fee for your owner, because it's not just the cost to go to tribunal, but also maybe $200 or $300 tribunal appearance fee, which will then de-incentivize owners that want to get nitpicky or on frivolous matters, you know, on little wear and tear items. Look, Mr. Smith, we're arguing over $80 here. It's going to cost me $250, for example, to take this matter to tribunal. We want to avoid that. To help you with your negotiation that you're talking about, Jackie, which is very, very important. And you're talking about putting your hat on and getting creative with negotiation, which is fantastic. We've got to do everything that we can to keep well away from tribunal. Another matter I personally have with my own rental property just recently, where the tenant moved out. She'd been in there a number of years. Look, the level of wear and tear on the property was pretty good. I was very happy with that, but there was some cleaning items that she hadn't done right. She'd rushed. Yeah. She bought a home, moved out, rushed those things, and the property manager had to get the cleaning done, a couple of $100 worth. And the tenant felt that she could do a great job with the rug doctor from the local dry cleaners to be able to do her own carpets. Now, just to jump in, I know in Queensland you can obligate a tenant to get carpets steam clean. That is not always the law around the country. South Australia, Northern Territory, the tenant only has to leave a carpet reasonably clean. And you cannot legally enforce a tenant get it steam clean. Even in the Northern Territory, if you write it into the lease that please ensure the carpets are professionally steam clean when you leave, you will be fined and penalised. So in this case here, we've got a crappy job done by the rug doctor on carpets. It hasn't been done right. It was professionally cleaned when she moved in, but she also had left some stains on the carpet, which the carpets were right at their 10-year tax depreciation, right at their 10-year limit. The carpets are all in good condition, but there was some bleachy type light stains on the carpet which were questionable, which we could have hit her for compensation. So we actually used those in negotiation. I said to the property manager, look, I need to get the carpets cleaned. They should be cleaned, and she needs to pay for the cleaning. But use the stains as leverage that we are not going to pursue that matter if she just then pays for the cleaning and the carpet cleaning. And she carried on, and a few other questionable things happened with her dialogue, which she was being a bit irresponsible for. But in the end, she finally agreed. She relented because we negotiated on the carpet. We used the carpet stains as leverage.
Yeah.
And that's how we got her to agree, without having to go to tribunal, because it just, would have gone to crap. So, some, very important things. Is there any other stories that you have around negotiation?
Oh, I negotiate everything. Lease renewals, like I might get shunned for this because I know it's a taboo subject at the moment in Queensland and Logan, and this property is actually on the northern Gold Coast. But I inherited a management. The client purchased the property with the tenant in place. Tenant's been there about 3 years. Tenant's buying a house. Like the rent increases that I'm doing are insane. We increased the rent from $4.90 a week to $6.50.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, and that's the market. $6.50 is under market for this property on the northern Gold Coast. Comparable properties were $6.80, $6.85, $6.90, some at $700. So with that negotiation, everything is negotiable, and that's why people pay us, because we should be expert negotiators. So if you're not, there's personal development and courses and things that you need to do to fine tune those skills. So how I took over the management, the previous agency had pretty much done the typical, issued a notice to leave because they'd not renewed the lease. They were only recommending increasing by $15 a week, which was just lazy in my opinion. So I told the owner straight away as soon as I inherited the property. So the tenants were building at the moment, and they still needed another 6 months before. They didn't want to move, and they knew what the market was. So I said first thing I did was call the tenant. I'm like, hey, I hate to do this because obviously this is our first interaction, but we need to get the lease renewal done. This is kind of where the market's sitting at the moment. I know it's a massive increase, but in saying that, with the rising increase, if we can justify it with the evidence that is found to be fair and reasonable, if there's evidence supporting it. So essentially went back to the owner and said, look, market rent, if they were to vacate, $6.85. Let's offer a lease renewal at $6.50 and show the tenant that, yes, we are increasing it a lot, but we're not increasing it to the maximum. And I sent them a heap of links from realestate.com and also did a CMA, provided that, and said, for us, we don't want you to move out because we know it would be extremely inconvenient for you to move out when you're currently building, and we don't want to put that pressure on you. However, this is an investment property, and for the owner's personal goals and property goals, we need to be achieving market value. And they signed within 24 hours. There was no issue. So, and I've got a whole list of stories with lease renewals. It's not always about negotiating for money as well. I negotiate. Tenant asked for a screen door 6 months ago. All right, we renew the lease at a $45 a week rent increase, but we're going to pay $440 for the screen door, which adds to the property and makes it more livable for the tenant. And things like aircon, like I literally, probably because I love negotiating, but we negotiate everything, and we align those negotiations with the owner's investment goals because that extra $150, or what is it, $160 a week, he's going to now be able to refinance. He only just bought the property. He's got instant equity as it is. He's going to refinance with that new rental appraisal. He's going to be able to buy another property. Wow. So that goes into, and then you think about the bigger picture with that is he's now adding stock to rental availability, which is assisting with the housing crisis, even though we are increasing the rent. Like, look at the fuel prices. Everything's increasing. Inflation, that's a side effect of COVID, and what they did with it is inflation. Everything's inflated, and it's just the new normal if you want to go with that. So I think everything is very negotiable, and I find it fun to negotiate. So that's a win.
Jackie, I'm blown away. We will wrap up this podcast now. So empathy, communication, negotiation is all about, making your life easier to stay away from tribunal, because I do agree. You want to stay right away from tribunal. The best property managers are the ones that never go to tribunal or hardly are ever there. So, well done, Jackie. Now, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
They can just send an email. So if you go to myloganrealty.com, you can find my contact details there. And I'm very passionate. I think there's a lot of things in our industry that we need to raise the standards on and the burnout and all the issues that we see, I just don't think there are actually training and ways we can put things in place that can just revolutionize the industry in terms of burnout and issues that people have. They're often avoidable, but I don't think a lot of people would agree with that. But I think if you're prepared to develop and learn new skills, you'll probably find that a lot of your issues will go away.
So yeah, get in contact with Jackie at myloganrealty.com. Is that a .com?
Yeah, .com.
Cool. And say hello to Jackie. Jackie, great stuff. You know, really take my hat off to you. There's a lot of bragging rights you've got there, which means you're a master property manager that stays away from Tribunal. You know, it's been really good. Thank you so much for being part of the PM Power podcast show.
Thanks, Darren. See ya.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.